Okay, let's call this Town of Superior Transportation and Safety Committee meeting for June 4th, 2018 to order.
And for members of the public, please sign in, and if you want to make remarks, use the podium, and give your name and address. We are taping this meeting, so
Roger Frazier at 302 West Maple, and I'd like to talk about getting from old original town to Whole Foods or the pedestrian bridge over 36 or the bus stops. I believe Marshall carries something in excess of 20,000 cars and was pretty much designed to expedite shoppers coming into the marketplace. If you look at the map, logical place to cross would be Sycamore, crossing Marshall there. It's a walk sign, but I find it uncomfortable and not safe enough to use. I live a block away, and yet I go other directions because of the turn lanes and the speed and the attitude somewhat of the drivers where they're trying to make right turns off of Sycamore, where you have to look kind of the curve up the road, and they tend to see you at the last second after to make sure there's no car coming. The other way to go is go across Sycamore to the west, go up to Center and cross, go up to Center, and then cross at that light, which again, if you're going to Whole Foods, it's backwards, but if you're crossing the highway or going to the bus stops, is not too bad. The other is crossing at McCaslin, but that's pretty much out of the way. The other is what I at one time thought was a pedestrian crossing, which apparently isn't, which goes across to the mattress thing by Second. And it has the best line of sight, and the lights are set so there are times when there aren't people coming in both directions, and actually you can go and stand in the median where you're just facing one direction at a time. But in any event, none of it is really effective or safe, or as safe as it could be. And I know that it's probably a complicated thing to do, and that it's a state highway, and the idea is to not inhibit the traffic that's going to Marketplace. But if there's a solution that can be found to make it more efficient and safer, it would be appreciated by probably a number of people who live there now and who may be moving in the future. You see a lot of ads saying walkability of Rogers Farm or development in northwest suburban area, and that's all true if you can get across Marshall.
Is there a painted crosswalk on either side on Marshall there? Is there any painted crosswalk anywhere?
With my hearing aids, I'm either going to have to come
closer.
Sorry.
I'll draw the mark. Is there any painted crosswalk now on Marshall anywhere? Do we have a painted crosswalk anywhere?
We have painted crosswalks at Sycamore and at McCaslin and at Center. We don't have one here. A little background about that. When the Marketplace was developed, this was thought to be a kind of a pedestrian spine. But as when this building came in, they kind of did away with that, didn't need that, and so that pedestrian crossing was never constructed. And actually, there's a ramp on this side. There's a ramp in the median, but there's no ramp to cross to on the other side of Marshall. And we've had several requests for that, and I've looked into it. I'm really hesitant to upgrade that to a marked crosswalk, to put flashing beacons, and really because of the 3 lanes that we have on Marshall. We'll
Right.
have a multiple threat where one car in one lane may stop, but the other cars may not stop. And I have discussed this with City of Boulder. Have you had situations like that? Because I know they have a lot of flashing beacons on arterial roads. And I described it, they were familiar with the situation. The 3 lanes really makes it problematic to put flashing beacons or a marked crosswalk there. Probably the only solution would be a regular traffic light. Again, we have, issues with Marshall and in terms of, making left turns on Marshall and then you hit a traffic light. So that's about the only issue. I wouldn't recommend, flashing beacons just for the multiple threat that some may stop and others may not, and we could have a dangerous situation at that. You're right, we have a lot of traffic on there, and I wouldn't want to promote a location where there could be some issues with, we don't want to put pedestrians in harm's way. So we're aware of the problem. One thing maybe we could do is put no turn on red here. Of course, Sycamore, no turn on red when pedestrians are present, so at least have that as a way of giving the pedestrians priority for that. So that's something we can look at, maybe try to increase the protection at the Sycamore intersection.
Is there a standard amount of time that pedestrian crossings at traffic lights typically run? And, if there is, how much time is given for a pedestrian, to cross at Sycamore and Marshall?
Yes, we have, when the push button is pushed, we have to provide enough time on the pedestrian phase to allow pedestrians to make it all the way across.
And how much time is that?
In this case, it's probably over 30 seconds because of the turn lanes that we have and the width of the intersection.
That's only if you push the button?
Yes.
What if you don't push the button?
Well, it'll take whatever green time you have on the cross street. So we're allowed, and we have to time the traffic lights. I think it's at 3 feet per second and that's typically for your elderly pedestrians. So when the pedestrian phase is hit, you calculate at 3 feet per second. So if you have 100 feet, that's over 30 seconds, plus the flashing don't walk. So that's required by the manual on uniform traffic control devices. So that should be in place there. So you should have plenty of time. The problem is we have to write the vehicles that make right turns on red.
Right, so I think it would be a shame to wait 3 months to try to do this, but maybe Alex, if you could just think about this offline and maybe just send your recommendation and we'll have your contact information. At a minimum, I think putting a sign, no right turn on red while pedestrians present seems like a good recommendation,
Sure.
but if you could noodle over it some more and then make a
Sure.
recommendation, and thank you. I had never realized it was an issue, so thank you for coming.
Yeah. And I wondered, is there a camera at Sycamore and Marshall that would show pedestrian traffic?
There aren't now. We are getting some more cameras, and that's something that
I know that some other people are concerned about crossing there, but I don't know if we're a minority or if it is as scary as I think it is.
right now, particular controller, there are ways of in the advanced controllers now, we're going to have kind of 2 pedestrian phases where you can have an extended pedestrian phase for those that need more time crossing. With this controller, we can't do that, but I know that's available, and I can look into it if we upgrade that particular traffic
And when
controller.
you cross at McCaslin, there are things for the turn lane where you're on an island and you're just facing one turn lane at a time. Well, you have a turn lane that's normal, but then you're on an island where the next turn is, and it's considerably easier for me. Thanks for your consideration.
And I think we looked at that, if we had a free right turn from Sycamore onto Marshall, but the problem is we have a detention pond that kind of limits us right there. But you're right. I mean, in the chasm, we do have islands that you can cross to, and it's a little little safer, so. But I'll come back if I determine we can put those signs in, I'll do that, immediately, and then I'll keep looking at other ones, other issues.
Good evening, Ken Lish, 1326 South Idalia Court. First, I wanted to say thank you to this committee specifically, and to Alex and your team. The speed humps at Weldona, when they first went in, I was a little surprised what they looked like and was suspect of the success that we would have. Not only do I think what Alex is going to show you tonight bears out that it's been successful, anecdotally, I can say the same thing. Living right at the corner of Weldona and Idalia, I've noticed that there's slower speeds, and something that isn't actually borne out in the data that I can attest to is that people are using the stop signs. It's remarkable, the change, and I truly appreciate it, and I think it's been very successful. To that end, though, I think there's a risk to the continued success, and I know that this is... you guys are board members, however, you're also a committee outside of the board. I watched the ProStack meeting last month, and they represented the Anderson application for review. The Anderson application does not have a through street that goes out to 88th. Rather, it simply uses Coal Creek as entrance and exit. That means that anybody who eventually wants to get to downtown Superior, once all the connections are in, is going to use Weldona to go all the way through. So now we're going to see a gigantic increase in the amount of traffic. I know you'll see this at the board level, but since this is a very specific traffic issue as well, I wanted to bring this to your attention to make sure that it'd be considered from a traffic standpoint, not just from your holistic board responsibility as well. So again, thank you very much. I appreciate what you've done on Weldona.
Thanks.
Could I ask a question? Pam Senjum, 3662 Castle Peak Avenue. Are you referring to the speed bumps
Yes.
on Castle Peak?
No. Different area.
Different area of Weldona? Okay, will we be talking about those speed bumps too?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Any other items from the public not on the agenda tonight?
I had one from somebody that couldn't attend, so question for Alex, not on the agenda. Coming down McCaslin into the traffic circle, a request from a resident to paint the right lane green, the cyclist green, not unlike to signal to the cars that they should be sharing the road with cyclists. There's a green cyclist as it comes off, signaling that cyclists are now sort of out of the road. And most cyclists that are going to take McCaslin, I think, know. But I think there still may, according to this, I avoid it on my bike, frankly. I just go on the sidewalk. But this gentleman commutes every day and says he's been honked at, almost run off the road. So they don't realize that the circle is designed for the bikes to be in the middle of the lane. So can we put a green cyclist on there?
The green stripes that we have coming
Right.
out, that's really for an area where you have vehicles merging or going
Right.
across a bike lane, okay? The appropriate symbol or pavement marking would be a sharrow, and we have the bike lane, that's where the bikes are supposed to go, but the bike lane ends. So when
Right.
the bike lane ends, a sharrow that basically says bikes and vehicles can use this lane.
Right.
And that's what we're planning on putting in this summer, to add those on the outside lane going
Good.
through the round.
So it'll be painted on I don't necessarily want additional signs on
No.
that. There's too many signs there anyway.
Right.
But it'll be painted on the pavement,
Yes,
something?
yes.
And the word for that is sharrow?
Sharrow, yes.
I will not ask how that is spelled, but thank you.
SHARROW. according to Google.
Excellent.
Does it say bike?
It does, but looking at just Google right now, I mean, some sharrows are green, and I know down in Denver they have striped their bike
Well, I'll
lanes
research the color.
green,
and
and
whether green would be.
It seems to be.
it seems like there's flexibility. I mean, so you could have something
Right.
like that where it's in the
Right.
middle of the road. I think anything that we can do as a community to have drivers share the road and
Right.
and show that we're a bike-friendly community. Is
I just think
something
that a
we
lot
should,
of cars don't know
Right.
that there's not a ton of traffic circles, and most when you're driving down, in Boulder, I can't think of the road, but there's a number of roads in Boulder where you're sharing the road with a cyclist and you're just used to it by now. I don't think it's expected on McCaslin. Anyway, so thanks, Alex.
Okay.
I'll report back to that resident.
Just a quick question, which,
If you can come up to the podium, please.
yeah, just a quick question for you. Which roundabouts are you talking about? All of them in Superior, or?
The one primarily that's the issue is the new roundabout.
The new one,
right,
okay.
Right there, that's on the
Yeah.
map.
Okay. And so that would be sharing of the outside
Correct.
lane, right?
It was right. It was
okay.
intentionally, so that was designed and built, and Alex, keep me honest here. So there is no pinch point between a cyclist and a car where there's a bike lane. So there's an
Yeah.
intentionally the removal of the bike lane. So the cyclist should be in the road. It's a 15 mile an
Yeah.
hour speed limit. They should be able to maintain that speed, and that's the design.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
And it's something we may apply to the other roundabouts in
Right.
town. I mean, they would all have the similar principle. Bikes would merge with vehicles going through the roundabout.
Okay, any other items from the public not on the agenda for tonight?
Yeah, the 20 mile per hour thing is.
It's coming up.
3662.
It's coming
Or,
up.
I mean, has to be.
It's on there.
Yeah, we'll be dealing with that on the agenda. So the next item on the agenda is item number 3, the Weldona speed humps update.
Okay, so we had a number of meetings over the last 2 years looking at what measures we could do on Weldona to reduce both the speeds and the amount of traffic going through that area. It's more or less a cut-through route from portions of Rock Creek getting to 88th, and a lot of people that go to Monarch High and other areas in Louisville have used it in the past. So the TSC, after lengthy debates and discussions, directed staff to install speed humps along Weldona. These are the 3 locations where they were installed. There was some concern after they went in that they weren't high enough or effective enough. I know the one on the west end, on the east end, was a little lower than we expected, so we made some adjustments when we built the other 2. So we've signed them and striped them, and so the question was, are they effective? So how do we measure effectiveness? So we took traffic volume and speed counts both before and after the speed bumps were installed. They were installed in October of last year. We took counts in August when school was out, and then in September after school was in session, and that was before the speed humps were installed. And then after in November we took counts again. So these numbers here are 24-hour daily traffic counts, so 1,368 vehicles per day. That's the total of both directions, and that's on Weldona, just west of 88th. It went up a little bit in September when school was in. We expected this to go down, but it actually went up to 1,534 vehicles per day. That's on the east end towards 88th. So that was surprising. But east of Vidalia, we had 595 that went to 623 and then dropped to 567. And on Akron, which is the outlet where Weldona connects to on the west end, went from 980 to 10,012 and then dropped to 962. So I think what's happening, maybe the Waldona residents can help me out. It looks like some of the residents of Waldona are more using the 88th exit rather than going all the way, and there may be some traffic that's not going all the way through. That's just my speculation. So volumes, it's hard on the east end went up about 9%. On the at Adelia dropped about 9%, and in Akron it dropped about 5%, comparing September with November. Then speeds, we had you count speeds in two ways. You put tube counts where you put two tubes, which measure the tires hit one tube and the other, and you measure the time it takes for those tires to pass, and that's how you can calculate the speed of the vehicle. And that you can put out and collect 24-hour data on speeds every hour of the day and so forth. So we did that before and after. 18.5 is really the sum of two directions, because we were getting directions in one direction and the other, so it's really 19 and 18, so it averaged 18.5. So that was pretty constant before, and then afterwards, just east of Vidalia, dropped about a mile per hour. Then the other way we measure speeds was with the speed trailer, and we placed the speed trailer, you probably remember, was it around here? Around there? And this was looking westbound, so we're picking up the eastbound vehicles as they came down the hill around the corner. And the speed data that we would pick up would be the first data point as they came down the hill and around the corner. So in September, we were getting 85th percentile speed of 26 miles per hour, and afterwards we were getting 20. What does 85 percentile speed means? That's the speed at which a good deal, greater than the majority of the vehicles are going at, and it's often the measure we use to set speed limits and to measure whether what the true speeds are. We're always going to have people that are way over there, a lot that are under. So the speed trailer caught a significant reduction, not so much in terms of the tubes. And it's kind of mixed whether we did anything with volume. So that's the data we collected. If anybody wants to comment on that or have any questions about it?
What's staff's conclusion as to the successfulness or
I think
failure
they're working. I mean, I think the speeds have dropped a little bit. Whether the volume has dropped, and that may be over time that people, just are tired of using the people that cut through traffic, may look at it and say, I want to go another way. So I'd like your comments on it. Sure.
Rita Kadich, I'm at 1278 South El Moro Court. I wanted to also thank the committee for these speed humps. As someone who goes out on stroller walks, I now feel a lot safer crossing Waldona, especially right near a speed hump, because I know that the people are going to probably slow down at least for the speed bump, and then they'll see me with my bright orange stroller. So I live halfway down the street, so I'm not seeing all of the traffic, but I do notice that people are going more slowly, and it's a lot less frequent that they're running the stop signs, but there's a stop sign at South El Moro, and someone just blew by it yesterday, so I was just shaking my head at that. But you can't change everyone, but thank you for this. I think it has made a difference, at least to the speed in our area, if not the amount of traffic.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Ken Lish again, 1326 South Idalia Court. I would agree with all of that. I too am pushing out a stroller every day, multiple times with two dogs, and it's made my life much easier. As far as volume, I had never fully anticipated we'd get a drop in volume. So my observations is that we're still hitting the same volume we were before. It really just, to me, is we've seen the drop in speed and the more frequent stopping at the stop signs. My final determination is it was successful, and I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Sergeant Chamberlain, any thoughts on the humps?
I like them. I spent time out there looking for stop sign violators and before they put them in. And I wrote some tickets, but I haven't found anybody. I haven't caught anybody since they put them in.
So Alex, I have a question about, the humps themselves. I've driven on Weldona a number of times, and every time that I drive there, I'm surprised again at just how, I'm glad they're there. I'm glad we've got the stop signs, but they don't feel noticeably like speed humps. Like they feel like something that you could actually drive over pretty quickly, as opposed to the temporary ones right now on Castle Peak. I feel like there's a little more pitch to those, a little more of an impact. The larger raised median outside of Superior Elementary, that certainly slows you down. So in terms of just, constant improvement, making improvements for the future, are you happy with how those speed humps were designed? Do you think that if
No,
we do
I
things
think
over, we would do
we'll
things
probably
differently?
make some modifications. The Weldona ones are about 3.5 inches high. The ones we just installed are 3 inches high. The temporary ones have the lip, so you're hitting that lip right away, whereas the paved ones are kind of smooth. You don't notice when you hit them. I think the temporary one's a little narrower, and I think that could be some of the problems. So we'll take a look at that design of the Weldona ones and make some modifications for any new ones we put in.
Because they should be something that, really
Jolts you.
incentivizes you to slow down and that it's not too comfortable. Now, obviously, we want to be mindful of emergency vehicles and fire trucks and ambulances and.
Right. I mean, we're always mindful, we don't want to wreck people's cars.
Right.
And that's, we do have a problem like over on Main Street where we have one of the speed humps there, if you notice, is a little bit too steep on one
Right.
side. So we're getting some real jolting. So we'll take that into account, and I think we'll probably make some modifications for the next ones we put in.
Right, just because they're expensive to put in, so I want to make sure that if we're putting them in, they're put in well and they're going to have the intended effect and be a proper use of taxpayer dollars. Any other public comment on Weldona?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
We're going to talk about Castle Peak in a minute. So.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to comment. I'm Brian Senjum with 3662 Castle Peak. And I just wanted to comment on the volume. Just from what I've kind of heard out there, in my own opinion too, it's a lot of work, more so than it ever used to be, to get across 36 by McCaslin with all the new construction and then all the additional traffic over there. And so I'm thinking that we're going to see more and more traffic going on 88th there. Just because of that, people are trying to avoid that and get across. So just an observation there.
Thank you.
Yeah. I prefer to go there rather than McCaslin.
Okay. Any other public comment on Weldona? Okay, the next item on the agenda is item number 4, the Castle Peak speed humps update.
Okay, so at the direction of the TSC, we installed these temporary speed humps in May. We had received them in January. We were worried about their performance during the winter, so we wanted to wait until snow was over to put them down. The location's hard to see on graphic, but there one's right about here. This intersection. So they were, we found those online. They were about $3,500 a piece to purchase, about $3,500 each to install. So they're about $7,000. So they're not, they're a little less than the other ones, but they're pretty expensive. They're tough to put in. I mean, our crews were out there for about a day each time putting them in. They do have a lip that you hit. We're worried about what happens in the winter, whether the snow plows are going to rip them up, how we're going to handle that during the snow, whether we should leave them up or take them down and put them, reinstall them. So we haven't figured that one out. I think We may just leave them up to see if the snowplow is going to avoid them, but we'll see. So we took counts before and after the speed humps went in. Took some counts in December. The ones up above here on Castle Peak were done in December of last year. And then in April, I think TSC wanted to look at other areas to see if we had any effect with diversion of traffic to other locations. We also took speeds, so just south of Rock Creek Circle, where that first one was installed, about 28.5 was the 85th percentile. By Shivano Peak, about 25.5, and by Grays Peak, about 25.5. So the daily traffic looks like everything went up. I think this was in May. There was might have been some school events going on. I don't know what you guys experienced. It just seems like the traffic all over was up that week. I don't know if it was graduation parties or end of year school activities. So and moving or landscapers coming in. I don't know. All these volumes are higher than what we measured in the prior period. However, in terms of the speeds, right at South Rock Creek Circle, we had.
Yeah, Alex, that was actually the primary fifth grade graduation on the 23rd and the middle school graduation on the 24th.
Right. Okay.
So you may have gotten a few more grandparents coming in than you would otherwise get.
But the speeds looks like we had a very effective reduction on that first speed bump right in this area. And, this is coming down. This is your highest volume. And, we had a reduction from 28.5 to 21. So I think that was very good to see.
And we only did daily traffic, not 85th percentile speed on Torrey's Peak, because the theory was we were worried about the balloon effect. We'll push it one way, but it's going to go somewhere else. Did we look at the traffic on Torrey's Peak? The speed on Torrey's Peak?
We didn't have speeds, no.
Yeah. So we had how'd you do the daily traffic counts?
Well, the traffic counts are again done by tubes, but the daily ones are done with one tube, and the speed, there's a different counter involved. So, we did the volume ones. We certainly can get, speeds.
Right. I mean, just we're learning here,
right.
Which is, I love this committee because we try things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think anytime, unless we're out of tubes, but anytime, so long as it's not a huge additional expense, if we're getting volume, we may as well get the data. It's one thing that you're hearing from the board, is a very data hungry board. So having that speed data would have been helpful.
Okay. So, and then the other location was at Grays Peak, north of Grays Peak. We had, again, two mile-an-hour reduction speeds. So it appears that we did have some effect, and just anecdotal, I know that our maintenance people have been out there, and people seem to love them in terms of slowing the speeds down, and it's a noticeable difference in terms of right in that area where the speed humps are. I don't know if you want to comment on it.
I don't have any other comments on it. I've driven on.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from members of the community that live in that neighborhood.
Thank you. I'm Brian Sunjum with 3662 Castle Peak. And I would like to make 3 points regarding, because it sounds like this is all about safety, traffic safety, right? And people are concerned for their children in the streets. Point 1, there are a lot of cars parked in the streets, and I know a couple of months ago this issue was addressed, And we saw a huge decrease in the number of cars out in the streets. But I know over time here, there's been more and more cars out in the streets. And when there are a lot of cars in the streets, it's hard to see people. And I think that really gives people cause for concern, a kid running out or even an adult and things. So I think cars parked in the street is a big component of this. Number two, children playing in the streets. There are a lot of children that just play out in the streets, and I've even witnessed adults playing out in the streets with them. The other factor, too, with the real sloped driveways that we have, when kids are playing on a sloped driveway, a ball's going to roll out in the street. And so, again, a big component, I think, of the safety is kids in the streets. The streets are meant for the cars. And then number three, as far as this, so I guess I'll back up a little bit. Things like the speed bumps and stuff, I think can be a good idea. And I think, though, that we need to really determine how many and exactly where. So there probably needs to be a little bit of study with that to make sure those get in place correctly there, because they can be detrimental otherwise or be ineffective. And then, of course, a police patrol as well would be another one there. But as far as the speed limit is concerned, across the nation and across Colorado here, 25 miles per hour is pretty much considered reasonable for a community. The concept of reducing the speed to stop the people from going 35 miles per hour, right, because that's really what we're kind of concerned about. There are a number of people blowing stop signs or going pretty fast through the neighborhood. We could reduce the speed limit to 5 miles per hour, and that will not stop these people from blowing stop signs or going 35 miles per hour. So I think we need to look at other things other than reducing the speed limit. Reducing the speed limit does not address the issue at hand here. The issue is people going too fast, blowing stop signs, kids playing in the streets, and too many cars parked on the streets so that the visibility is poor. So that's those are my issues. Yeah, did you have anything else to add, Pam?
I think that's a question.
Pam's my wife.
Is it because of the speed limit in general that you guys put in the speed bumps? Was it just the speed? Were people complaining? Was it just being observed?
So we've had a number of complaints about Castle Peak in particular for a number of years, and this is an ongoing issue that this committee and the board has been addressing. But the genesis of these speed bumps, we had a citizen sponsored proposal that came before the Traffic and Safety Committee to suggest alternate side of the street parking to address what your husband just talked about, the density of the parking, and to maybe make Castle Peak less parked up to make it safer, right? And that was one of the proposals there. One of the comments that we heard actually pretty frequently from the public was that the density of the parking actually made it a little less like a raceway, and if it was a wider street with less parking, people would feel more. It would actually encourage people to drive faster. We had people talking about it on both sides. So ultimately, when this issue came before the Transportation Safety Committee, and then ultimately before the board, the proposal was, why don't we try this temporary speed bump measure on Castle Peak, get some data, see if it's actually having the intended effect, and do it in a non-permanent way that would be less expensive than if we installed permanent speed bumps, and then reassess after a period of time. So that was kind
No,
of
I
the
appreciate
genesis.
that. But when these decisions get made, they change the whole neighborhood in general. And do these decisions get, a resolution is made permanent just from these council meetings here, or do the residents actually get to vote and have a say?
Well,
Because my
nothing is.
concern is, we've been here for 10 years. You have to allow about 15 minutes to get out of the neighborhood. Because of all the cars being parked, you have to wait for the car to come towards you, then you gotta dodge the other car, then there's a stop sign, then there's a dip in the road, then there's, you drive a little bit, then there's another stop sign, and we obey the stop signs, and I get it, and I've seen people blow through them, and I wish there was someone there to catch them, or maybe we could take down their license or something like that. But by the time we get out of the neighborhood, it's like, oh my God, who put in the speed bumps? Right? Because now what they're doing is, people are racing more to try to get around the cars. From stop sign to speed bump to the next stop sign. So now people are more anxious to get out of the neighborhood. So I'm kind of thinking if something like this is going to vote to go permanent, whether it's based upon data or whatnot, I think there should be a bigger announcement so more people can get feedback and more people can see the pros and the cons versus just having less than a half a dozen people in a room making a decision.
And that's a fair point. And we're right now in the midst of this pilot project on Castle Peak, and we're gathering the data, and we're going to reassess and make a recommendation to the board. And we don't know how that recommendation is going to go, but ultimately, before we make a more permanent solution, there would be additional opportunities to engage with the public and get input.
And just to add on what Brian was saying, I mean, the kids do play in the street with all the nice parks around and with the new wildflower park and all the open space. I think we need to do something to encourage the kids to go out of the street. Or people are putting those little signs in the middle of the street, also stopping the cars to go around them, saying, watch out for kids. I get it, because, balls go in the street, but they're putting them in the middle of the street. So maybe if we can get the kids out of the street and into the parks and into some of the green areas that are so beautiful in the neighborhood, then maybe people wouldn't be so rushed all the time to get in and out of the neighborhood. Maybe they'd feel more relaxed. It almost feels like it's getting to the point where we shouldn't just drive in the neighborhood. We should park our cars, and it's kind of like a European neighborhood, and just walk. But and I do believe there needs to be more patrol around Grays and Shavano Peak, because people do blow those stop signs. I'm not really familiar with the speed bump on Rock Creek Circle, but I think if more people knew that people were watching them, that they would slow down. I don't think the speed bumps are doing it. I think they're racing from stop sign to speed bump to stop sign to just to get out of the neighborhood. But I just wanted to, just lend that different opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Zarsky, 3016 Castle Peak Avenue. I've been to all the meetings since you guys have been talking about Castle Peak, and I just want to say thank you for the speed bumps. I like them. We've lived there for 13 years, and when we keep our master bedroom window open this time of year, we usually hear the cars zoom up and down the street, and haven't heard that since the speed bumps have gone in. So we appreciate it. They're fun to ride on a mountain bike. Thank you.
Any other public comment on Castle Peak? Alex, I just have a couple questions in terms of staff. So obviously we saw the data. Is staff making any sort of recommendation to this committee or the board as to whether or not they should be continued?
Well, I wanted to ask the committee, what's the next steps? Do we want to collect more data? Do we want to develop, are these the two here? Do we want to develop a more extensive plan?
How much do the permanent speed bumps cost? That's 15,000?
About 12,000.
12,000? And that's for soup to nuts design and installation?
Right. Mhm.
But these are 3,500. I mean, the temporary, I think we had the vision when we ordered the temporary that it wouldn't necessarily be 3,500 to lay down. It was somebody pulls that out of their truck and puts it down in an hour. It sounds like it's so.
Well, these are effective. I mean,
Right.
you know,
The lesson we learned here is these are temporary, but sort of, almost-
7,000 piece.
Yeah.
So
They're
it's-
pretty, they're not something we want to move. I mean, I think at least, I was thinking, we try it here for a week and then try it there for a week. This feels like something we need to keep for many, many months. And
Right.
so, since we're going to keep it for many, many months, I think let's continue to collect the data. I think the comment from a resident is a good one, that if people are speeding between the speed bumps, that would be a bad thing. And so let's put the tubes at a midpoint between two speed bumps and make sure that we could just confirm that, or see whether or not folks are doing that or not doing that. But I've driven it a number of times, and frankly, I drove it more as an experiment than anything else, and it was enough as a deterrent. I wasn't using that as a shortcut anyway, but it was enough of a deterrent for me to not use it as a shortcut. I've got a little car, so it's not very convenient to go over that. So most of and we only have a few public comments here, but I have heard public comment outside of this forum of
Do you want to
positive
go
feedback.
out to get additional public comment at some point to decide whether to put them in permanently? You know, maybe do a survey.
I think
Yeah.
before we
Yeah,
go
before it's
permanent,
permanent,
definitely
absolutely.
we should do some, engagement. I think, if we did like a Survey Monkey type survey to the residents on Castle Peak specifically, I would want to make sure that we're careful as to who we are asking for data, right?
Mhm.
Because this is the same issue that we had with the Weldona speed bumps, that the people who were living on Weldona were highly supportive of making those speed bumps permanent, whereas the people who lived on, other streets
Feeder
that
streets,
used,
yeah.
the feeder streets that used Weldona to cut through were opposed to Weldona. And, they're fair points, but if the primary motivation is to decrease the speeds to increase safety for all the residents, I think it's important for us to make sure that we're careful about who we're asking for data. So, we don't need to make that decision now, but that's something I
agree.
think to be mindful about it. But I agree with Kevin. I'd like to see more data specifically to address Pam's, it was Pam, right? Is that your
Yes.
name? Pam's concern about speeding between the speed bumps, because we certainly don't want to encourage that. And, before we make any permanent decision, let's do more engagement out. And I think that probably should be something that goes to the full board for a final decision.
Can we also maybe try a different tactic versus speed bumps and, taking people out of the street and cars out of the street? But maybe if you increase the cost of the ticket for speeding, that would slow people down. Because people don't like to pay high costs.
So the cost of a ticket is $30 per point, and that's set by the court. It's not set by me.
It's not something that could be established.
The court can reestablish a fine schedule. I can't do it.
Okay. I was just,
Is that set by
Thinking of
the
a different
municipal
one.
court or set by state court?
It's set by the municipal court.
Okay.
And we did.
And it's on average with most of the other communities around here.
And we have encouraged Sergeant Chamberlain to up patrols and ticketing, and we have funded some additional officers. So we're doing what we can. One of the challenges we've heard there is there's no place to park the patrol car. And when people see the patrol car, they tap the brakes, obviously. So that's the challenge.
So today I drove all the way up and down the street from one end to the other. And the fastest car I have is 23 miles an hour. I drive with my radar sitting on my dash so I can see speeds. But even if I were to get someone who's doing 35, if you've ever seen the car that I drive, it's pretty obvious. It's a Ford F-350 crew cab utility bed truck. It's my patrol car. I can't turn around to get after somebody. And then parking, we enforce more on traffic, like stop signs, than we do speeding in neighborhoods, because it's easier to park back a ways and have people not see you so they run the stop signs, because they're not seeing you. But when you run radar enforcement, where you can sit so you can see traffic, people can see you a mile away, and we stick out.
Are we also going to talk about the 20-mile-per-hour
Yes.
averages?
Yes. Alex, one of the additional things that we talked about when we originally had the citizen-sponsored proposal, we talked about striping and putting signage up to encourage people not to park directly up against the curb going into the various cul-de-sacs that, you know, approach Castle Peak. I know we did some signage. Did we do any striping along the curbs there?
We, just the no parking signs within so many feet of the stop sign. So we've established some no parking zones in that area.
Has that no parking been enforced or been a problem at
It
all?
hasn't been a problem. People have been parking within the limitations of the signs.
So that seems like it's done the
I really
trick.
looked at when we first went in, so we haven't seen an issue. with
Another
it.
request we did get was maybe just from a sign pollution. I think people would be courteous to the red painted curb without the sign. And I know the signs may be necessary for ticketing, but if we're not trying to ticket people, we're trying to prevent something. If we could prevent it through a red painted curb without the sign. So maybe the next one we do, can we just try the curb and see if that's, painting the curb without the sign and see if that's effective? I got some feedback the other night that you guys got a lot of, or the other day at the First Friday, just sign pollution all over town. And I agree, so be interesting experiment to see if just the red works. And I know that from a code enforcement, the sign is probably necessary, I get that, but we're curbing behavior, not policing the code.
Okay, we can try it.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment on Castle Peak? Okay, the next item on the agenda is item number 5.
Okay, so we are starting to get new speed hump requests, and these are 2 that have come in, and I just wanted to check with the committee about how to handle these. My thought was first we collect some before data on these roads at various locations, get some speed data, and then send out notices to the residents that live along these streets, similar to what we've done with Waldona and Castle Peak, and probably inviting them to a TSC meeting to present their requests and get their opinions about, whether there's a problem and whether speed humps would be a solution.
How many requests have you received?
Hmm?
How many requests have you received?
These 2.
Yeah, how many?
One piece.
One per street?
Right. So I don't want to go out and put speed humps based on one person.
No, that's why I asked the question.
How many did you get on Castle?
We've been hearing about Castle Peak for years.
Yeah, we had several meetings.
The first time I've ever heard about it was when they put them in.
So do you want me to refer these back and say, get a petition up or get?
I don't think we need to do a petition. I'd love to see, I'm not I'm not a believer on the 85th percentile data, but collecting the data with and without the 85th percentile, let's throw down some of the tubes and collect data on Andrews and Yarrow. And, I don't drive either one of, I drive Andrews periodically, but I frankly don't drive Yarrow very much. So I'd like to see it. I mean, if the 85th percentile is 27.5, you guys obviously know how I feel. I don't think that's remotely safe.
Mhm.
So if the 85th percentile is 24.5, then we'll look at other priorities. So I think measuring data and trying to prioritize, because this, we don't have a budget for hundreds of thousands of dollars for speed bumps on every road, right? So we need some cost-effective solutions, and we need to prioritize.
Mhm.
I also don't want to, have our town get a reputation of just constantly putting down speed bumps, without careful thought and deliberation. I would encourage whoever made these proposals to you, Alex, or if they came into Matt or Martin, if they're open to it, if they would come to a committee meeting or to a board meeting and speak during public comment, kind of explain, what the problem is, because part of this is, understanding what the problem is, and we want to make sure that we're being responsive to the community and addressing safety issues. But at the same time, I certainly don't want to cause, concern for the neighborhoods unnecessarily. And just because we get one request in, all of a sudden now people think that there's going to be speed bumps installed everywhere. So I want to make sure that we're doing this in the right way. So I think probably the next step would be to reach back out to the people who made the proposals and see if they're willing to come in and speak to the board. And then secondarily, if we could, gather some additional data, maybe we do the traffic, the speed data, the volume counts on those streets with the tubes, and take it from there.
Right. And I invited, I think, a Yarrow requester, I invited them. I said, we have a meeting next week, come and present your case, and he chose not to at this point anyway, so.
These are both recent requests that came out? Okay. If you could come up to the podium, please.
And just so you know, that we're not torturing you, we record this and.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. Hi, I'm Brian Senjum, 3662, Castle Peak. Quick question: How much do those radar speed signs cost? Because I feel like those are probably even better than the speed humps. I've seen a lot of people really slow down at those. It's like, they're showing your speed, and then, you're going too fast, and it flashes the lights and stuff. Every time I drive by one of those, I see everybody slowing down and stuff. I don't know if that's a possibility to put something like that up at all. Although it goes against your sign thing, I know.
Well, we have a mobile trailer already.
Yes,
correct?
we have a speed trailer that we can put on. We do respond to requests for people that want the speed trailer or want to get data. So that's certainly apparently, but about a speed radar sign costs about $5,000. So about $5,000.
And right, so Brian, there's a lot of tools in the bag for traffic calming, right? And so I think that's certainly that I agree that is effective. Putting out the trailer has been effective. Some of the more permanent signs have also demonstrated some effect.
And how about the photo enforcement vans? I know they had those in Denver. I don't know if they're still using them, but they had like a minivan set up with a camera, or they also have intersections that have camera set up. I think that's
Denver
mainly
does that, Boulder does that, but it's not done through the police department. It's a separate organization, and basically the companies that handle all the equipment end up making most of the money, and you're paying for the employees to run the machines, and because it's more of a civil action than a criminal action, because it's a fine associated, it's not points associated against your license, so it's not something that we handle, and our sheriff will never put up. He's not in favor of them.
Why is that?
He doesn't like them. He thinks that if you're going to get a ticket, you should be talking to an officer.
I guess the flip side to that is if you don't have enough officers to actually enforce the speed limits, what choices do you have to actually compel people to drive the speed limit?
Right. I understand that, but our sheriff is against them. And like I said, the city of Denver and the city of Boulder is run through a separate part, not through the police department.
Okay.
Okay, so move on to the proposal to lower speed limits on residential streets to 20 miles per hour. Trustee Ryan has brought this, wants to move forward, at least collect background information, decide whether to move forward with this town-wide. So I put together a presentation on legal issues, current design standards, crash and speed data, implementation costs, and some public outreach suggestions. So there's a growing movement, especially in Europe and in Canada, to make 20 miles per hour the default speed limit on residential and urban streets. There's also a parallel movement to create 20-mile-an-hour zones where you would actually have traffic calming and other measures to actually keep those speeds down to 20 miles an hour. So the goal is to improve safety and livability in residential neighborhoods by decreasing vehicle speeds. And it's been shown that if someone gets hit at a speed of 20 miles an hour, he's has a much lower probability of being injured or dying versus 40 miles an hour or much higher speeds. So Portland recently enacted a 20 mile an hour speed in residential areas. I think Seattle is considering one. In Colorado, Aspen, Telluride, and other jurisdictions have adopted 15 mile an hour or 20 mile an hour speed limits on residential streets. Mostly those are in mountain communities, but there may be other communities I'm not aware of that have a 20 mile an hour speed limit in residential areas. So where do we get the authority for speed limits? And it really starts with the Model Traffic Code, which is developed by the state and put forth, and we've adopted the Model Traffic Code. There's a concept of prima facie speed limit, and basically says, well, if you're driving in a residential area, even though there's no speed limit sign, the speed limit is prima facie 20, in this case, 30 miles an hour. So officers can write tickets in residential areas without a traffic sign located. There's also speed limits for mountain roads, highways, and other types of roadways. So prima facie is statewide is 30 miles an hour. We've adopted the Model Traffic Code, and the Model Traffic Code allows entities to adopt different prima facie speeds in different areas based on traffic investigations and other criteria. So we've adopted through our town code, the Model Traffic Code, and we've also adopted the maximum lawful speed limits in residential districts of 25 miles an hour and non-residential 35 miles an hour, and any speed that is posted erected by town based on a traffic study. So that's our authority to do that. So we've already lowered the speed limit from the statewide 30 miles an hour in residential areas to 25. So how do you change a speed limit or the prima facie speed? And the state law says whenever county or municipal authorities within their respective jurisdictions determine on the basis of a traffic investigation or survey or upon the basis of appropriate design standards and projected traffic volumes in case of newly constructed highways, you can modify the model traffic control speeds greater or less than is reasonable or safe under the road and traffic conditions at any intersection or other place or upon any part of the street or highway in its jurisdiction. And the said local authority shall determine and declare a reasonable and safe speed limit thereat and do appropriate signing. In other words, you can sign when you enter the community 25 mile an hour on all streets unless otherwise posted. So you can do it that way, or like we do, we've posted 25 pretty much throughout residential streets in town. That law has since been modified by just recently. This was just adopted and signed in state law a month ago. House Bill 1191, which says for residential neighborhoods, after additional optional consideration of road characteristics, current and future development, environmental factors, parking practices, pedestrian and bicycle activity in the vicinity, and crash statistics from the most recent year, the local authority shall determine and declare a reasonable and safe speed limit that is effective when appropriate signs giving notice are erected. So we do have now the authority to base speed limits on other factors than a traffic survey. And I think we need to interpret what this means and what's the criteria that we can use. I want to go back to the basis for lowering the speed limit from 30 to 25. And I believe, and I think it was based on our roadway design standards. That we've developed standards when we built Rock Creek Ranch and others. We developed a set of roadway standards that basically said, well, local roads are going to abide by these standards. They're going to be so wide, they're going to have sidewalks, they're going to have speeds, curve radiuses. You're not going to have a 55-mile-an-hour curve radius. You're going to have a lower curve radius. So we've established a number of roadway characteristics associated with local roads. And that's why we had the basis for lowering the prima facie speed from 30 to 25. I've been involved with street standards for 30, 40 years. And one of the issues that we've had over the years was traffic calming, because we used these suburban street standards that had a factor of safety built into them that basically said, well, we're going to design the road for 40 miles an hour, and we're going to post it for 35 because we wanted this factor of safety. Well, if we want traffic calming, that's not what you want to do for residential streets. You want to have criteria that kind of limits your speed, not as minimum criteria. So we did adopt in 2003 one criteria, this last bullet, for local streets, the posted and design speed are the same. So we don't have a factor of safety that we try to design our roads, new developments, not most of Rock Creek, but in our new developments where we're trying to limit and actually have design features that keep the maximum speed limit to 25. And so we've had, and in fact, we developed in 2003 specific traffic calming guidelines to do that, and we've applied them in Coal Creek Crossing and now the town center. If you go into town center, we have roundabouts, we have four-way stops, we have raised pedestrian crossings, all things that we're designing into that development to try to limit speeds and not provide minimum standards. So we also had criteria when I was developing the road standards in 2003. I want to look at what can we do to build in traffic calming into our new developments. And I did find some criteria in Atlanta and I think some other entities. It was the concept of minimum criteria for traffic calming based on unimpeded street length. If you look at a street like Yarrow or like Castle Peak, where you can go a quarter of a mile and not have a stop sign, not have a curve, not have anything else, well, you're going to be going, you can easily go 30, 40 miles an hour because you have nothing to slow you up. So you look at the length of the street, you look at the traffic volume, and you try to design in some, not speed humps, but, pedestrian crossings, four-way stops, bulb outs, anything you can do to have some impediments in the street length to build in traffic calming. So this is the traffic calming criteria we're using now. And I think when we look at some of the speed hump requests, we can also apply that criteria. Is it a continuous road with a long length? Doesn't have anything to slow you down, and maybe you can apply some of this. So we do have traffic calming criteria, incorporated into our new standards. So that's so I believe our prima facie speed limit of 25 was based on our roadway design standards, and most of the Rock Creek is we don't have on local roads speed, curve radius that are higher speed curves. We have lower speed curves. We have widths that, for example, our widths for a typical travel lane on a freeway is 12 feet wide, and it's 12 feet wide, so a truck can travel at 65 miles an hour. Well, when you're on a residential street, you're going much slower, so you don't need that width. You can go with 10-foot widths for travel lane. So our typical local access roadway is 34 feet wide, and we have two 10-foot lanes, and we have two 7-feet parking lanes. So we provide parking on both sides, and we have narrower lanes, 10-foot lanes instead of 12-foot lanes. So that's some of the design standards we use. So crash data, again, I developed this crash data before I found about the state law that actually takes crash data into effect in setting speed limits if we wanted to lower speed limits. So here's accidents that occurred last year, and you can see it's hard to tell on this map, but most of our accidents have, occur on our major arterials like McCaslin, Colton, 88th Street. We do actually have probably more accidents that occur in parking lots, in Costco and Target, and others, and our private developments, Bell Flatirons and others. So we do have a lot of accidents, not a whole lot on our residential streets. This is accidents going back 6 years. All the accidents, they're kind of grouped in the circles, or show the number of accidents. So the bigger circles are a lot more. I did go back to look at some of our data. This one injury crash per year, I wanted to look at, well, are we hurting people on residential streets? I went back over the last 5 years and looked at injury accidents that occurred on residential streets that were on segments and not were non-intersection accidents. And you guys keep good records and have that data that I was able to do. And I pulled out about one injury accident a year on residential streets that are between intersections. And I think there's about 8 to 10, it could be more, property damage crashes per year on residential streets at non-intersections. And I didn't have a chance to go through all the data to get an actual average.
Are there ages associated with that data? Being that we have student drivers?
There's a lot of that. Well, we when an accident occurs and the sheriff's office is summoned to the scene and fills out an accident report, they collect a lot of data, and they have driver's license, age. Yeah, there's a lot of data behind it. Yes.
Interesting.
And if TSC wants me to go back, I can certainly pull out other statistics based on the accident data. So that's the accident data. This is the speed. I tried to pull out speed data on some of our residential streets. You've probably seen a lot of this before. We had the Castle Peak data that we just showed you. We had the Waldona data. You've seen some of the Coal Creek data. These are all 85th percentile speeds. So you're taking speed profile data and trying to collapse it into one figure. So there's a lot more data behind this that you could look at. How many people exceed the speed limit, how many people do 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of data behind that. We had Huron Peak that we surveyed, Castle Peak. We had some data from survey from Torrey's Peak way back when we were doing the flashing school zones. We had Bristol. So that's some of the data that we've collected over time. So I tried to put together where would we apply this 25 mile an hour speed limit to. Generally local streets and residential areas. I excluded collectors with back out driveways. For example, Coal Ridge and Coal Creek, excluded that. Private streets we really don't have jurisdiction, so I excluded those. So this is the map I came up with. And certainly as we move forward, we'd like the TSC's input, whether I've captured the streets that you're interested in capturing. But again, there's no Bell Flatirons is excluded, Saddlebrook, and some of the collectors and so forth. So what are some of the implementation costs? I'm suggesting a substantial public outreach process, maybe mailing to everybody in town, maybe SurveyMonkey, so there's some costs associated with that. Sign installation, I'm just guessing 200 to 250 signs in place now. That's say 25. That would have to be changed to 20. It's about $100 per sign, so that's a substantial cost. I don't have in here any engineering or any cost for a traffic survey. I don't know what that's entailed and whether it's Bush that I say do 20, or do we need to go out and collect data and have an engineer come in and do that. So I haven't included any of those costs. I'm suggesting some public outreach strategies, create a webpage with some of this information, any other information that TSC would like to see on it, have articles in the newsletter, notices mailed to all town residents saying that we're going to be doing this, have e-blasts, maybe a survey monkey or a mailback postcard that's saying, would you, how do you feel about lowering the speed limit on residential streets at 20 miles an hour? And then have additional, maybe one additional TSC meeting, if not more. And then the town board, in order to do this, we would have to amend the ordinance that we have for the model traffic code and establishing our speed limit. That would entail a public hearing process, so that would have to be appropriately noticed and public hearing held before the town board. So I'm welcome any input that you may have on how to proceed.
So I think, why don't we talk for a minute and then we'll take public comment? All right, so Alex, first, thanks for putting this together. This is really comprehensive and good, so thank you for doing that. Since I made the request, let me just start with a comment and then kind of why I made the request and then I think where we are in the process. As a general comment, I would love I agree with you that you know, I've done a lot of reading since I've been on the board and since I've been on TSC about how to get people to just slow down, right? And the best way to get people to slow down is design the roads appropriately for the appropriate speed, because that is what a lot, maybe not most, you know, there are rule followers out there. If somebody made a comment, maybe it should be 5 miles an hour. If which would be silly, but if we made it, there would be rule followers and they would drive 5 miles an hour, but most of us are gonna drive what we think is a reasonable speed. Our roads are not designed as well as some of our newer designs. I look at, you know, Main Street as you go into town center. You can't go more than 10 or 15 miles an hour. If you try, you're gonna bang up your car pretty good. It's the road is narrower, it has speed bumps. I like the way the parking is there. It is a really well-designed road. It is so anomalous to anything else in the neighborhood that when it was built, people thought it was a one-way road. They couldn't believe that we were building a road that narrow. So really great job there. If we had millions of dollars, I'd say, you know, let's redo all our roads in Rock Creek and throughout Superior, but that's just not possible. And so we are left with considering alternative traffic calming measures. As we repave streets, we're going to look at some alternatives, like eventually we're going to repave some streets and we could do some cram downs, not unlike the one on yeah, Rock Creek Circles. There's a couple different areas that have the raised crosswalk and the cram down so the road gets a little narrower, and I think that is an effective method. But there are we need to look at all other methods. You know, Sergeant Chamberlain's, I think, and his team have done a nice job beefing up as much enforcement as we can. I asked a very direct question last October, you know, do you need more money for increased enforcement? And the answer at the time, my interpretation of the answer was no, you don't need additional money for additional, that's not gonna help us get additional enforcement. You have the patrol officers you need. We can't just the way the town is configured. So I made the request looking at all alternatives, and rest assured, we are very early in this process. There will be a public engagement process. There is zero risk that the speed limit is going to change anytime in the next few weeks, or frankly, even few months, or even in a calendar year with 201 something. You know, this will be a process that will engage the community. There were two things I was looking to investigate. Number one, I've sort of heard you and I, Alex, have had conversations about traffic studies, and I knew about the House bill, right? So I knew that we had a little bit more flexibility, that we didn't necessarily need a formal traffic study to make some changes, that the new statute allowed us to have to basically make that determination without a formal study. And I think our attorney sent us a memo, and my interpretation of that memo is that her interpretation is the same. But it is a new rule, and they need to catch up the model traffic code, and there are some things that need to be caught up. But question one, can we do this? And I believe it doesn't answer, should we do this? Or may we do this? Or does the community support this? It's, can we do this? Because if we do the research and engage the community and then came back and said, well, we couldn't do it anyway because the model traffic code prohibited it, that would annoy people. So this was, the initial question was, can we do this? Not, we haven't solved for the should we do this? And the answer to that, again, is I think so. Second, is there any risk to doing so? In other words, or, would we need to do something else? Would we need to revisit the home rule for this particular, would we have to be a home rule municipality? Do we expose ourselves to a resident who would then say, well, wait a minute, you violated the model traffic code, so now spend another $20,000 or $25,000 to undo something? And I think the answer to that is it would not impact us whether or not we were home rule or not, which we're not. And it doesn't sound like there would be much risk. And so now it is looking at, from my perspective, the safety issue. Alex has convinced me and others in reading the data, the difference between 20 miles an hour and 30 miles an hour is not going, we're not going to see statistically fewer accidents. I just don't, I've convinced myself we're not going to see statistically fewer accidents. But when you look at the data around mortality for car versus pedestrian, it's really scary. And it's you have a reasonable chance of surviving getting hit by a car if that car is going about 20 miles an hour. If that car is going between 25 and 30 miles an hour, or God help you, above 30 miles an hour, particularly if you're a kid or an elderly person, your chances of surviving that are really, really, really low. And so for me, I'm looking at low-cost alternatives to resolve some traffic calming initiatives, and I think this is an alternative that should be pursued through the appropriate public outreach. I recognize that there are people that may live on the outskirts of town and may drive a mile or two to get in and out of town, sometimes multiple times per day, and I may be inconveniencing them for a matter of minutes per day, and that'll add up to tens of minutes per year, hours per year, and tens of hours in your career in Rock Creek, and I think that's an awful inconvenience. But I'll go back to say, if we design the roads in Rock Creek the way the roads are going to be designed in newer neighborhoods, the way they're designed in original town, we would design the roads at 20 miles an hour. So now I'm trying to basically, what can we do to fix the roads to get people going that safe speed, where if a distracted driver, because that's where it causes accidents, distracted drivers. If a distracted, and keep me honest, but that's my assessment anyway, if a distracted driver hits a kid, and I hate to be dramatic on this, I think we need to do the research and engage the community and see if the community can support a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. And if the community doesn't support it, this isn't, I will let it go. But I personally really want to bring this forward to the community and have it a community-wide discussion. So, Mark, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I'm certainly interested in hearing what the public has to say, but first off, I want to applaud you for bringing this to the committee's attention, and this is exactly the sort of thing that we should be doing, and thinking outside of the box and looking at ways of bettering the community. A couple of questions that I have for Sergeant Chamberlain. To Kevin's point, but I just want to make sure that we've got a good record here on these issues. So how many officers do we have here in Superior on average at any point in time?
So on day shift, we have 2, plus myself. On night shift, we have 1 on each side of the week, plus a power shift guy who works Wednesday through Saturday.
Okay.
During the busy call load time.
We, in our last budget this past year, allocated additional resources for your office, is that correct?
That's correct. We added 1 new deputy. Before that, we had 1 on each side day shift and a traffic car who worked Tuesday through Friday. And now we went to 2 officers on each side of the week, so we have two deputies full-time on day shift.
And do you recall approximately what that additional cost was?
About $115,000.
Okay. And I presume it would be possible if we wanted to add additional officers in Superior, it's just a question of how much we're willing to pay,
Exactly.
right? So it's approximately $115,000 to get another
About
officer?
115 to 118 with startup costs, yes. And that includes, that's the officer benefits, vehicle, uniforms, all the equipment, and associated costs with it.
Right. Now, since adding that additional officer this year, have we had any additional kind of ramp up in terms of traffic citations being written?
At times, at periods we have, not overall. I mean, it depends on the week. If you look at the statistics for this year, we've got hit with a lot of property crimes, so lots of our officers were tied up on numerous property crimes, whether bike theft, vehicle trespasses. So those take an amount of time. Our processing isn't what it used to be with DNA and fingerprints. We're doing a lot more. So we're spending a lot more time on scene and then a lot more time doing the reports and dictation. So I wouldn't say it's a significant increase in traffic. They're spending more time, and I have them spending more time in the neighborhoods versus just on the main arteries. But it's not generating more tickets. They're spending more time in the neighborhoods, not necessarily generating more ticket revenue.
And that was my next question. It seems like most of the focus of the enforcement, at least in the past, has been on McCaslin, on Rock Creek Parkway, on Colton, on the major arteries through town, as opposed to on the residential streets.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that most of the tickets are written on the arterials. That doesn't mean most of the time spent doing traffic enforcement is spent on the arterials. They're spending the time in the neighborhoods. They're not seeing the speeds that would warrant a traffic citation. They're seeing that on the larger roadways where they're writing more tickets. So does it mean they're spending more time out there doing tickets? No, it doesn't. It means they're writing more tickets in those areas. Doesn't mean they're spending more time.
Right, you've got higher volume on McCaslin, Rock Creek, Colton, coupled with higher speeds.
Correct.
And it's just going to lend themselves, plus you've got the topography of the streets themselves, which
Correct.
will lend themselves to higher speeds. If we wanted to kind of ramp up on like an ad hoc basis temporarily and get additional enforcement for purposes of kind of upping enforcement kind of seasonally or periodically,
We can
wanted
do
to
that.
do like an enforcement month in certain neighborhoods. Is that something that we could do?
So we can do that through our extra duty program, which is a contract rate at $63 an hour for a deputy in a car to come out here and work for however many hours you want per day, and we just get volunteers to sign up to do that, and then I put standards together and where I want them to be and what I want them doing with the town's input.
Okay. Are there other jurisdictions in the area that do that sort of thing?
Lyons,
And have they had success with it?
yes. Lyons is a little different. Everything drops down to 25 miles an hour from 50 to 55 miles an hour going into town, and then the main streets through town are all residential. So that's where a lot of the ticket generation is coming from, is people speeding through town. I know Lafayette often does a traffic enforcement car for extra duty, and they put extra cars out there just primarily to work traffic. I can get the statistics. I'm not sure what they're doing as far as their volume of traffic contacts and such.
What, in your opinion, could we do to better encourage people to drive at slower speeds on the residential streets?
That's a tough question. I mean, I go out there and I drive the streets, and they see me, they slow down. So I guess if we put a police car on every street, people would slow down. And
That's what they're doing now, with parking cars.
I've got cars at the parking lot. I can park cars in different parts of town on different days with nobody in them. You just let it sit there, and people will slow down. But in reality, you know, it's that old theory of do what's right when nobody's looking. Not everybody does that. If nobody's looking, they're not going to do the right thing. That's a societal problem. I don't know how to address all of society.
If you think about the different options we've talked about, and feel free to volunteer any others that we haven't talked about, but you know, speed bumps, mobile speed trailers, the permanent speed signs, the photo enforcement vans, you know, what, maybe striping additional streets and narrower striping, maybe adding in bike paths, you know, what do you think would have the most
Again, to me,
lasting effect?
making the streets as narrow as you can has the biggest impact. You know, it's one of the things we talked about with Castle Peak as far as the people parking on one side one week, the other side the other week. And my theory is put as many cars out there as you can, because that slows people down. They can't help but just go slow, so they have to leapfrog and move around. You know,
What about the bike sharrows? The bike lane striping? Would that have an effect? By narrowing kind of the lane of traffic, if we
It
added
may.
bike lanes on most streets?
It could. You know, I haven't seen any data on it. I haven't seen it in any area, so can't necessarily say whether it would or wouldn't.
Okay.
You know, the speed limit signs, the flashing signs, you know, the ones that are red and blue work better than the ones that are just numbers. Because the ones that are just numbers, some people see it and slow down, and other people want to see how high they can get that number up to. It's just the way it is. It's not right. We've watched people do that, and we've stopped people for that. But, yeah. So the ones with the red and blue flashing where they can't see what their speed is, all they can tell is if they're going slow enough. Those are better than the ones that have just the numbers on them.
And Sheriff Pelly's, I guess, policy with these mobile speed enforcement vans,
He doesn't like them.
he doesn't use them?
No.
Does he have an objection to a community like ours, you know, contracting with those providers and using them?
I don't think you'd have a problem with you guys doing it, no.
But those things are handled by the town and through a
Correct.
contract, so any
Correct.
citations that would be issued through that would be independent of anything that the sheriff's office
Correct.
is doing, right? Okay. I'd like to hear from the public.
Oh, can I say one other thing? Sure. So you guys are seeing things, and I know a lot of people see speeds and they think people are going really fast. And I'm not saying perceptions are wrong, but what we're seeing from inside the car with the radar going is different. And I would encourage anybody, whether it's someone from the board or from the public, to sign up to do a ride-along with us. Come out and see what we're seeing and what we're doing.
Yeah, so because of where I live, you know, unless there's a calibration issue with the flasher, I mean, I've got, you know, I'll sit out there with a cup of coffee in the morning and watch people go 33, 34 miles an hour down Torrey's Peak. So, I mean, I understand that this is as we're starting to, this is an interesting topic because it's a safe place to engage where, you know, we obviously can't engage with the community around a development application in the Safeway. I have no excuse, not that if you're watching on TV and you see me on the Safeway, feel free to stop me and I'll talk to you about traffic. So I've engaged with a bunch of members of the community, and the consistent feedback is really what we need is additional enforcement. And I don't really disagree with that in concept, but I have learned over the last year and a half from you that that's harder than it sounds because, you know, you can't be on every street. It does cost money. The topography of our residents, we've got a number of cars of our streets. We've got a number of cars that are already parked on the street, so there's no way for you to go. And, you know, to your first and excellent point, once people see you, they tend to slow down. They're not that dumb. They're dumb enough to speed, but not dumb enough to get a ticket. So I'm looking for every option available, and this is one.
I'm
which
with
is
you.
why I brought up. So,
Anything we can do to slow people down, I'm all for it, so.
right. And thank you for your support.
And
by the
along
way.
with you, if anybody has questions about traffic, they can call my office anytime.
Right.
I'm more than happy to speak with anybody about it, so.
Right.
So as a town,
Sir, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the plate.
Asa Merriam, deputy with the sheriff's office. As a town, do you guys want us making stops at 5 to 9 over for a 2-point ticket and summoning citizens at that $60 fine?
So I've addressed this at the board level, and I personally do. I think it's probably it's direction you need to take from our town manager, Matt Magley. So I think Matt and Sergeant Chamberlain need to have that conversation, but I'm embarrassed that I got a ticket in a school zone. I deserved it. I was speeding, and it hasn't happened again, and it curbed my behavior. I think people should be getting tickets for anything that you can calibrate. So if that's 4 miles an hour over the speed limit or whatever your minimum calibration is, yes, personally. But I think that direction needs to come from Matt.
So when I'm training people, I usually tell them that, hey, 10 or more over is when you're okay to stop.
don't stop somebody for something you're gonna do in your own personal car.
Right.
And then that changes, you know, if you're on 128, 10 miles an hour over at 65 is much different than 10 miles an over in a residential zone if you think about the percentages.
Yeah,
10 miles an hour on a residential is a much higher percentage than that, but if we would have support from Chamberlain, and that's the direction the town tells us to go, since you guys are paying us, that's something we could start training our people. Hey, residential areas in Superior, the town is supporting us and wanting us to write people these tickets. One other thing, when I worked down here that we've done, Chamberlain said, hey, there's a bunch of people, go make a stop on whatever road. Doesn't matter what I'm stopping somebody for. Everybody assumes I pulled that car over for speeding and that they're probably gonna take it.
Right.
So that's just something he didn't mention that he's had us do. He gives us directions to go in neighborhoods to look for specific things, which ups the patrols in the neighborhood. People don't know why we're there. But if I pull someone over for a taillight out, give them a warning, everybody in the neighborhood thinks, oh, they got one of those speeders. So that's another way he directs us to be in the neighborhoods and be present, look like we're doing other enforcement to ease people's minds.
So so why don't we, I think it's probably worthy of a board discussion, so, to talk about increased enforcement, but personally, absolutely, would love to hear Mark's opinion, but I think we need to bring it to the board to say we are encouraging Sergeant Chamberlain and staff to up the enforcement, and if that means it's, 4 miles an hour over or whatever the minimum is, great. But if the speed limit is 25 and you're going 35 or 33, I would hope that person would get a ticket.
What is the minimum right now?
So it's based on every officer's discretion, but what we're training, or what I'm training people is 10 and over is when you're going to start making stops. School zone's a completely different ballgame, but just regular residential areas. If someone's going 33, we might stick our arm out the window and go like this, tell them to slow down, flash our lights at them, but we're typically not trying to make a full contact on that. Now, if it's a kid in a dark Honda Civic we get complaints about every day, then we'll be out looking for that person. But that's a different circumstance, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Am I stepping out of line, or do you agree?
No, I agree, but most of the guys down here, in neighborhoods or school zones, it's 5 over.
Okay.
And I agree. I mean, I think that the resounding, overwhelming majority of the comments that I've heard on this particular topic is, why are we considering reducing speed limits if we're having an issue with enforcement already? So, to the extent that we could encourage the sheriff's office to actually, enforce more, I think that would, hopefully go a long way to actually changing behavior. And that's the one thing that, we hear time and time again, is that what changes behavior is when people actually get a citation and have to pay the fine. So, generally speaking, I'm in favor of, enforcing the speed limits that we have, particularly on residential streets, because I don't think we're going to change the behavior as much as, we would like to by really anything other than, people getting pulled over and getting tickets. I think kids are going to play in the streets regardless, and I think what we really need to do is do what we can to make the streets safe, recognizing that there are going to be soccer balls and basketballs rolling out in the streets and kids chasing after them, and we need to make sure that those kids are safe. That should be the priority. Additional public comment?
Pam, 3662 Castle Peak Avenue. I agree with Mark's comment of enforcing what we have right now. I do believe in the school zone. It's 20. It's slow, but it's rightful in the school zone. But I think it's a bit too slow in the residential, and we do need to enforce it. And I like your idea of not waiting until they're 10 over, but maybe, 4, maybe, or could be anything over 25, to lower that, because I didn't know it was 10 and then you're back to 35 again. So.
That's just our discretion.
Right.
You can pull them over,
But
2 over.
I just worry about consistency and fairness. So if I got pulled over at 9, but or at 5, but everybody else in the neighborhood were pulled over at 10, then I'd probably say, well, are you discriminating against me for some reason? It was my first ticket or something like that. So I think consistency is going to be key. My question was for Rick. You had some really good information, and you seem to come across as a really good subject matter expert, but you never did give us your opinion. So I would like, because you've been doing these studies now, I wouldn't actually compare Superior to Telluride or Aspen to any mountain towns, because those are big volume. Those are people from out of state. These are not residential people living here. You got a different mixture of people. But I would like, if you just focus on Superior living here and knowing what you know with the data, with the crashes and everything else, what your opinion is.
Well, I'm not going to put forth my opinion. What I will say is I'm concerned about the traffic investigations, the survey to justify 20. Looking at the criteria, give me, they put all this new criteria, but they didn't give any, standards. How many bicycles, how many pedestrians, what's the roadside environment? So it's like there's.
I think that's fair, Alex. Why don't I set up a call with you, me, and Kendra, and Matt, and let's talk through that. So,
and
thank you.
As an engineer, I want to provide the data that the board's going to make their decisions on. So I look at that, all those things they added, and I'm trying to figure out. There's 8 accidents a year. Is that an appropriate? What's the standard? So.
Yeah, and I can't thank you enough for the data that you provided, and there is some, I wish the scientific answer to this is redesign our roads. It's just out of our hands, right? And so now we're looking for some artistic solution or combination of solutions that's available to us. So.
Ken Lish, 1326 South Idalia Court. First, Trustee Ryan, really appreciate you bringing this forward and trying to continue to find solutions for the traffic issues in our community. The primary concern that I have is I saw that we have a budget estimate of less than $30,000 to implement this. My biggest concern is that's not actually going to be adequate for making this successful. We know that there is going to be the survey. There's going to be a cost of that wasn't reflected there. There's going to be additional staff time that's going to go into this. I don't know if that was reflected in these costs. And then what's already been discussed, the obvious enforcement of this, and that's either hiring additional officers or taking officers away from other duties that they should rather be, or that they're already doing, which tells me they're a higher priority already. So I think that cost in there is grossly understated, and we're going to end up looking at a much higher cost if we want this to truly be effective. I think that the biggest obstacle here is we have tangible items in speed humps. People have to slow down on Waldona. They have to slow down on Castle Peak. They don't have to slow down when they see a 20-mile-per-hour stop sign. I think this is something that deserves continued investigation, but I think it's something that we have to really consider from a cost perspective and whether it could truly be effective. Something that Sergeant Chamberlain just said that really struck me was you stated that the majority of our traffic tickets are on McCaslin and whatnot, and not necessarily in the art or within the residential streets, because you're not seeing that. So we're not seeing that we're going over the 25 right now and that it is worth getting ticketed. So I'm concerned that we actually don't have the data to show that this is the biggest problem that we perceive it to be. And again, perception could be different than what actual reality is, but I think before we would move forward on all these additional costs, we want to really ensure that this is a problem that we are tackling appropriately.
Just a few questions. Austin Todd, Summit at Rock Creek, Unit 256. First, I definitely support this. I have no problems going slower. I think it's the place where I live. I don't have kids or anything. I do walk my dogs a whole lot. I enjoy the calmness of I distinctly notice when people go speeding by on residential roads. And while I feel safe because, I'm watching for myself, there's also like just a environmental feel factor of you don't hear cars zooming by, and it feels more like a community, which I think most communities nowadays are moving towards the more people getting out and recreating and transportation that isn't car related. So I think this is a good way to kind of support this. And I do notice a lot of speeding. My one question I have, I guess, would be with the, I've heard that with lowering it from 25 to 20, while I'm for doing that, there is the question of sometimes my understanding is the more you move out of what a realistic range somebody feels is they should be driving on a road, but even less likely they are to follow that, the speed. So, for example, if the person already likes to drive just a couple miles an hour over the 25 and then and is complaining in the back of their head that, I wish I could go even faster. When you drop it down to an even more unreasonable 20, then they're just like, screw it. I'm already going to be speeding a little bit, and this is ridiculous. Down to 20 miles an hour. I'm just going to do 30, 35 miles an hour. So I don't know. While like I said, I obviously support it. And I understand it's difficult to enforce, and there might be a lot of other factors around it as far as enforcing it. That's one thing to look at, is that the farther you get away from what people currently feel is a realistic speed limit, sometimes they decide to break the law even more, or be even less observant of the speed limit. And then seeing this pop up, I had a question regarding, so I live at the Summit at Rock Creek townhomes, and my big thing is, because on a daily basis, for either recreational purposes or to walk my dogs a few times a day on long walks and stuff, I'm crossing Rock Creek Circle. This Rock Creek Circle is being left out of the change in speed, if I'm correct. I've always considered for 30 miles an hour on Rock Creek Circle is sufficient if people actually did 30 miles an hour. I think the fair number of people don't. And so I would like to throw out there that if we're going to move that down to the residential streets, potentially down to 20, from 25 down to 20, I'd like to see something like Rock Creek Circle move down from 30 down to 25. The one odd thing about Rock Creek Circle, I believe, is it's the only in between an arterial and a residential road that I can think of that it does have houses facing, their front doors facing the road, which I guess I'm seeing now that a driveway that you would back out of is your differentiating factor. I had always looked at it as how close is it to somebody feeling like it's the road is right alongside their front door. And obviously, I don't have personally, I don't have a unit that sits that close, but I do know there's the entire Rock Creek Circle has units facing directly out to the roadway. A couple other factors throwing out there. The whole thing is a circle. It's a constantly curved circle with elevation changes, very drastic elevation changes from the Starbucks coming up. And if somebody decides to do 36, 37 miles an hour, you got to be watching pretty carefully when you're pulling out from most of those intersections. and if you time it just wrong, you're gonna, cut it pretty close. And looking at the accident statistic sheet that you gave up with the diagrammed one, it appears there was an accident on every single intersection around there except for the one farthest to the west. But obviously down on Colton and Rock Creek Circle, but then all three of those around. And I appreciate that crosswalks were put up there. When I'm crossing the street there, I definitely have to make sure that the people see me. I mean, sure, there's definitely some people that are very aware and will come to a stop. Most people, unless if you walk out there in front of them, they're not going to stop for you. So you have to really time yourself and be the conscious person there, which just goes back to there's a lot of people crossing that street. It goes directly from a large HOA, which on the north side is fed by the Safeway and all the recreation park stuff there, fed over into that island of the HOA, and then there's recreation and residential area to the south. So there's a lot of crossing the street on that curved road that once people come out of the residential area doing 25 or 20, it opens up and they definitely think, all right, now this is 35, even though it's 30 until you get down onto actual Rock Creek Parkway, and they're ready to start gunning it out from the residential roads and stop signs there. So just throwing that out there.
Thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
so also, I think there was a couple observations. Let me just respond to a couple things. Number one, there's definitely lowering the speed limit is not a slam dunk. This isn't, it's not going to immediately solve every problem, and arguably there's risks. There's the risk that, to your point, that if you're going to be frustrated, are we going to frustrate more people, and so somebody's going to be a more frustrated, more distracted driver. You also run the risk of having really disparate speeds out there. You might have somebody going 19 miles an hour and somebody else going 30 miles an hour. That's not a good scenario to have cars going that totally different speeds on the same road. And frankly, there's a risk, and in thinking about this, there's a risk that we may see more kids playing in the street that they think the street is their playground. I personally grew up in a neighborhood where the street was my playground, and I really enjoyed it, but looking back, I realized maybe that was not the safest place for me to play. But there is the risk that, there could be, Mark and I talk about this a lot, the unintended consequence of if we went through with this, then, are we having that unintended consequence if we made something more dangerous instead of more safe? And in terms of Alex's initial write-up was really about the pure residential, which we defined as back-out driveways. I think as we think about how this is the next phase, and I think Ken's point is good, we're probably going to spend more money than 20 or 25,000, and so we should talk about how to do this efficiently. We should look at Rock Creek Circle as well, and whether or not can have the speed limit reduced. So with that, I know we're almost, I think I have a proposal to consider, and I think arguably this is a three-phased approach. I think the first phase is, can we do this, right? Legally, legislatively, is this something we can do, or would we otherwise be wasting our time? And so I would argue that we have resolved the first phase, which is, yes, we can. I think the second phase is, should we do this? We have not even started to engage the community in a meaningful way. So I think we need to start to engage the community in a meaningful way. I'm not sure that's through a SurveyMonkey or a formal, expensive survey. There might just be articles in the Sentinel, maybe some, a traffic and safety booth at the 4th of July parade, that where we're talking about or getting community feedback, but it is some better outreach than what we've done today, which is, an email blast or two. and spend a few months doing a should we, and then before we enter that final phase, which is will we, and that will we, because this would require some changes to the Superior Municipal Code, will require a board vote. And I think that's something, I think there's a phase gate at each one of these. Can we? I think we've resolved that we can, thanks to the good work that Alex has done and the fortunate changes at the state level. So now it should we, jury's out, we need to engage the community. And then will we need to engage the rest of the board, assuming the community provides feedback that this is something that they would support.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think that was really well put. To me, this comes down to, in a perfect world, we could start from scratch and think about design, right? And in a perfect world, we wouldn't have such wide streets. We'd have, the ability to design streets for the speeds that we actually want people to travel. Also, in a perfect world, we'd have the resources necessary to make, corrections. I think, to Austin's point, I don't think that any of this is necessarily limited to just residential. I think that's a really good point. One of the first issues that was brought to my attention when we were elected and joined this committee was, what can we do about Rock Creek Parkway? Because people were traveling way too fast down Rock Creek Parkway, and they're talking about, well, it's a 4-lane road, maybe we should make it a 2-lane road and have a nice bike lane. I'm intrigued by the idea of adding additional bike lanes. Generally speaking, to the extent that we can make the community more bike friendly, I think we should do that. I'd be interested, and I don't know if we have this resource already, Alex, do we have a map of all of the streets that we have bike lanes striped? And if not, can we put something like that together?
We have a bike, the county, we get together with the county every year and put together a bike map, but maybe just.
I would just like to see, superior streets that have bike lanes identified on a map. I think it would just be really.
Ones that are bike lanes.
Yeah, that have, bike lanes, not necessarily, going on the sidewalks or anything like that, but, bike lanes striped on the streets. Because I think that may identify opportunities for us, because it can't cost that much to just, stripe a street. And if that could actually, I'd also like to understand, is there any connection between, striping a bike lane and decreasing the speeds traveled on the streets? Maybe you already have that information, but I would assume that if you have something striped for bike lanes, that generally would encourage people to travel slower.
How do you envision that working on a residential street? Have the bike lanes striped on a residential street with on-street parking or any shallow?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I'd like to see what do we have striped, and then I'd like to see what are the options, what are the opportunities there. I'm not suggesting necessarily that we put a bike lane on every single street, but first I'd like to have a census of where do we have bike lanes, because that seems like it would be some low-hanging fruits. In terms of ultimately adopting this, I think it's a really good and intriguing idea, and if this will be something that will lead to a safer community, it's something that we should seriously consider. If it's something that will never be enforced, then we should think twice about it. And if I don't want to spend $25,000 on new signs and then not enforce it. That to me would be really just not smart governing. But if it's something that we can actually enforce, and I understand that the sheriff doesn't like those mobile units. I'd be open to looking into something like that. If this is a question of changing behavior and actually making our streets safer, I think all options should be on the table, and we should look at everything seriously. If it's a question of people slow down when you park your cars on the street, I like the idea of actually parking the cars that you're not using on the residential streets. If that actually ends up slowing down behavior, and if it just ends up making the community safer because people think that there's an officer in the area. So anything's on the table as far as I'm concerned. I'm open to anything. I think that this is something that we should bring to the board to discuss, maybe we talk about it in a work session first before we actually go forward with the full proposal. Maybe we need to have this come back to the committee before we're actually making an actual recommendation, because the one thing that I don't want to have happen with a proposal like this is I don't want the community to think that we're going to do something and our messaging is either premature or not carefully crafted, because it would be really easy for people to get upset and think that we're going to do something when we're just asking for feedback on the idea. So I think whatever we do with respect to going out to the community, we need to be really careful about it, because this could be something that I think could cause people to overreact to it. But I applaud you for bringing this to the committee's attention. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. All right. We're adjourned.